Riddle me this, dear viewer. What do you get when you cross a vanity project from an egotistical director with dangerously perfectionist tendencies and a studio that writes him the movie equivalent of a blank check? Well, you end up with Heaven's Gate, one of the biggest critical and commercial flops in Hollywood history, and one of the most infamous examples of a director's ego running completely out of control. Delays, massive budget overruns, financial corruption, and clashes on set were just some of the problems that turned Heaven's Gate into production hell. So pull up a chair and join me as we discover what exactly went wrong with Heaven's Gate. The movie started life way back in 1971 when a young writer-director named Michael Cimino submitted a script called The Johnson County War, a western epic about land barons fighting with immigrants for control and power in 19th century America. The aim was to get John Wayne into the lead role, but he wasn't interested and so the project went nowhere. That is, until Cimino directed The Deer Hunter, which swept the Academy Awards and turned him into Hollywood's golden boy overnight. Suddenly United Artists were tripping over themselves to offer him any project of his choice, and of course, he chose The Johnson County War, now renamed Heaven's Gate. United Artists gave him an initial budget of $11 million with carte blanche to go over if he needed it, basically writing him a blank check and telling him, "Have fun, old boy."
Not a great plan.
And as you'll soon find out, this would turn out to be a horrendously bad decision. Cimino wanted an epic all-star cast for his epic movie, and pretty soon Christopher Walken, John Hurt, Jeff Bridges, Chris Christopherson, and even a very young Brad Dourif were signed up. Filming began in April 1979, and it didn't take long for cast and crew to realise this was going to be a fucking tough one. Cimino already had a reputation as a perfectionist kind of filmmaker, but on movies like The Deer Hunter, he'd at least been forced to rein it in. Now there were no safeguards on him, and he was free to indulge all of his worst tendencies. And believe me, he did. He'd demand up to 50 takes of the same scene, straining the patience of his actors. He'd delay filming by hours until the clouds looked just right for the shot that he had in mind, and he especially loved to shoot his outdoor scenes in the golden hour, that time just before the sun sets. It looks great on camera, but the problem is it only lasts for a few minutes each day, and if you don't get the shot you need, guess what? You're gonna have to wait 24 hours to try again. One of the most infamous legends around this movie is that after 6 days of filming, they were already 5 days behind schedule. And it only got worse from there, believe me. An entire city street that was purpose-built for the film had to be completely torn down and reconstructed because Cimino decided it needed to be 6 feet wider.
Fuck.
Now, you might think it would make sense to just take one side of the street down and move it 6 feet over, but nah, that wasn't good enough for old Mike because then it wouldn't be perfectly positioned.
I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
Fuck me, there's always a guy like that, isn't there? There's always that one arsehole who goes out of his way to be as awkward as possible and just will not bend for anyone, even when it's obvious that everyone hates him. The problem is, that arsehole was now in charge of a multi-million-dollar movie that was rapidly falling apart. Part of the movie was supposed to be filmed at Harvard, but when they refused because of Cimino's ridiculous on-set demands, the production was forced to move to the UK to film at Oxford instead. But Cimino decided he really wanted one particular tree to be in the scene, so he had it cut down, dismantled, shipped across the fucking Atlantic Ocean, and reassembled in the courtyard at Oxford so it looked just right. I mean, just... why? The delays became so protracted and ridiculous that John Hurt was able to fuck off and make a whole other movie with David Lynch in the time he was waiting around for shooting to start up again. The film also became notorious for allegations of animal cruelty on set, including cockfighting. Cocks. Cows being bled out without anaesthetic to provide blood for the battle scenes, and at least 4 horses killed and many more injured. One was apparently even blown up with fucking dynamite. One of the horse wranglers filed a lawsuit against the production for mistreatment, and it got so bad that the American Humane Association added Heaven's Gate to their list of banned films. As a little side note actually, this movie was largely responsible for the "no animals were harmed in the making of this film" disclaimer that you see on basically every film these days. Needless to say, Heaven's Gate didn't get it. Anyway, all these problems, delays and controversies meant that costs were quickly piling up on Heaven's Gate, blowing through the wildly optimistic $11 million budget within the first few weeks. It would eventually end up costing $44 million, literally 4 times the original budget. Bet you guys were really regretting that carte blanche deal, weren't you? The film was now costing the studio $200,000 a day, about $700,000 in today's money, to pay for cast, crew, equipment, and most of all, land rental. See, the production had to rent out big areas of farmland for the outdoor scenes, and they were expensive. And when the studio decided to do some digging to find out where all this money was going, wouldn't you know it, the land just so happened to belong to Michael Cimino himself.
Really?
The man was literally paying himself to rent his own land for this movie. Fucking baller move there, Mike. No wonder the guy was taking his sweet time with this one. Naturally, the studio weren't impressed by all of this and seriously considered firing him, but by that point the project was too far along, and so it was easier to just keep pushing forwards. Anyway, filming finally wrapped in March 1980, almost a full year after it began. Cimino then locked himself away in the editing bay for post-production, and I literally mean locked. He changed the locks on the door so that nobody could get in there except him, and refused to show any of the studio executives his work until it was finished. And boy, did he have one hell of a movie to show them. The first cut of the film was 325 minutes. That's right, this fucking movie was originally going to be 5.5 hours long.
Oh man! Oh god! Oh man!
Once again, the executives considered firing him, but nobody else was willing to work on this thing, and so instead they demanded he cut about 100 minutes of footage from the movie. Even then, the version they ended up with was close to 4 hours long, but there was no time to make further cuts, and so in November 1980, Heaven's Gate descended upon the worlds. Apparently the reaction at the premiere was so muted that Cimino asked why nobody was drinking the free champagne they'd laid on for them. His publicist cut right through the bullshit and told him, "Because they hate the movie, Michael." Well, that's a refreshing bit of honesty for Hollywood right there. Now, speaking from experience, I can tell you that alcohol is usually the best way to get through a bad movie, but each to their own. The critical reaction was an absolute slaughter. The film was derided as a bloated, self-indulgent, ugly vanity project and an unqualified disaster. Roger Ebert called it the most scandalous cinematic waste I've ever seen. And remember, I've seen Paint Your Wagon. In 1999, Time magazine officially listed Heaven's Gate as one of the 100 worst ideas of the 20th century. The film was only in cinemas for a week before the studio panicked and pulled it, forcing Cimino to cut it down again to 2.5 hours for a wider release. None of it helped though, and the film went on to become one of the biggest box office bombs of all time, bringing in just $3.5 million against a $44 million budget. The film was such a disaster that United Artists' parent company Transamerica Corporation pulled out of filmmaking altogether and sold the studio off to MGM. The film's failure also derailed Chris Christopherson's acting career, which had been on the rise up until that point, and it would take about 15 years before he finally started getting high-profile roles again. And what's about Michael Cimino, you might ask? What became of the man at the centre of this cinematic clusterfuck? Well, funnily enough, United Artists dropped him like a hot brick, all that goodwill from The Deer Hunter vanished, and most of his planned projects fell through. He'd eventually go on to direct a handful of low-budget movies, most of which flopped, and finished up with The Sun Chaser in 1996. After that, he pretty much disappeared into his Hollywood home and spent the last 20 years of his life as a virtual recluse. Just before he disappeared though, he gave an interview with People magazine reflecting on the failure of Heaven's Gate and what it meant for his life and career. It really was a great trauma, as everyone knows. Since then, I've been unable to make any movie that I've wanted to make. I've been making the best of what's available. Heaven's Gate really was production hell for everyone involved. But hey, it makes for a fun story at least. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.